Your onboarding experience is like the first set of dates after you've decided to become official as a couple. It's that special but vulnerable time in your relationship after you've both decided to give it a try, and now you're starting to establish what the relationship is going to look like. Your expectations of the other person are beginning to be made known, and vice versa. Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping IDD providers retain and grow their DSP workforce using behavioral science. I'm your host, Nate Beers, and today I'm going to talk about one shift in approach that can make a massive impact on getting candidates to their start date and then getting new hires to the 1-year mark. It's surprising to me how little I've heard about the importance of this paradigm in the different research I've done about staff retention. And perhaps that's because it's already assumed. But based on my interviews with DSPs, I don't think it's happening with a lot of agencies. Let me explain. I was talking to a DSP not that long ago, and she was sharing with me about how she recently was hired by an IDD provider and her onboarding experience and orientation experience. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably throughout. Sometimes I'll differentiate, but onboarding, I really mean to capture both pre-first day of work and after first day of hire, but when someone's brand new. Anyhow, she was sharing her onboarding experience, and it consisted of the following. She sat in front of a computer for a couple of days, clicked through a whole bunch of trainings. Then as soon as she completed the required trainings, she was immediately charged with providing full support to 3 high-needs individuals and had minimal contact from her supervisor and minimal support from her peers. Essentially, it was sink or swim. She had little influence on choosing her own schedule. She sometimes was even forced to stay on her shift for an extra hour or longer whenever the next DSP didn't show up to relieve her. And the only time she heard from her supervisor was if something was wrong. Now, predictably, she left that job within a couple of months, and she was quite relieved to move on from such a negative employee experience. Hopefully, your organization's onboarding is very different from this story. And since you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing that you, difference maker, are trying to build a much better experience for your DSPs than the one in this story I just shared with you. Now, at the risk of overkilling this metaphor, I think we should just really dive in for a couple moments. I want you to picture 2 different couples in your mind. The first couple is kind of like the sweet older couple in Pixar's movie Up. Regardless of whether you've seen it, I think you'll be able to track with me on this. They're deeply in love with each other, even after all these years. Although they're gray and wrinkly, their eyes still light up when they see their partner. He still surprises her with flowers from time to time, and she still writes him little love notes. Now, in contrast, picture a second couple. The second couple is more like Pam and Roy from the Office TV show. And again, if you haven't seen it, that's fine. I think you'll track with me. Roy was Pam's fiance before she broke up with him and eventually ended up with Jim. Even if you've never seen this show, I'm sure you can picture a couple where one of them has mostly checked out of the relationship already. Their partner is selfish and demanding. They don't look for how to give to the other person. They're only in it for what they can get from the person. Now, this could be a dating relationship where I've seen folks even married for a long time, and it's kind of this underlying thing. You know, I told her I loved her once, and if it changes, I'll let her know. Or anything along those lines. Now, what do these 2 couples have to do with onboarding? Fundamentally, staff retention is not just about keeping employees from leaving. It's about building a workplace that they love. You see, our goal is not that people feel forced to keep working with us or that they're completely checked out, but they're just warm bodies in the room. And we can't control whether or not they stay. This is not, I've never heard of it being contracted work. Maybe it exists somewhere. It probably does, now that I've said that. But it's usually at-will employment, and folks can leave whenever they want to, and they often do. And instead of being some kind of a forced relationship, this is voluntary, And we want people to love coming to work. That's what building retention is a lot less about actually retaining people as it is building something that's so attractive, that's so fun and rewarding that folks want to keep coming there. And so your onboarding experience, it's like the first set of dates after you've decided to become official as a couple. It's that time in the relationship, a vulnerable time, when both parties decide to give it a try, and now they're starting to establish what the relationship's going to look like. Your expectations of the other person are beginning to be made known, and their expectations of you are starting to be made known. And when you create an outstanding onboarding and orientation experience, it involves intentionality at every step of that journey. And it's like you can't show up lazy to the date. Like you're going all out. Now that does not mean being ridiculous or overly excessive, but what I am talking about is planning the onboarding experience and process so that it accomplishes some key things and so that your agency's best foot just keeps being put forward. Listen, if your agency is short-staffed and you're just trying to keep ratio and cover open shifts that there's like literally no coverage for, your overtime is through the roof, it becomes a vicious cycle. And I feel very aware and empathetic of that cycle, and then the negativity it creates and perpetuates. However, it is so important that even if you or any agency provider is facing that, the way to stay stuck in that cycle, to keep it going on, is to keep doing what you've been doing, or to have lousy onboarding, or to rush people through as fast as possible because there's just one crisis to the next. Somewhere the buck has to stop. And I would highly recommend that it at least stops during the onboarding and the orientation process. Now let's get really practical. Firstly, make it easy for folks to take the next step. Now, there are a few steps on before someone's hired, but during the initial onboarding or pre-hire stage, that there's some steps designed to weed people out. For example, I'm not saying we want to make it so easy that someone with a criminal background that would not be a good fit for an agency should somehow still be able to work there. No, there are certain steps that are designed to weed people out. But besides those that we are purposefully wanting to weed some people out, we want to make it rewarding and make it easy for someone to take each next step along the way. And this really is where your organization starts to establish expectations. You're setting the tone for what kind of a team that this candidate, this prospective new hire is going to be joining. It's the kind of it's sort of, like I said, sort of like dating. You don't want unnecessary casualties, or just because something's a little bit sloppy or lazy or reflects poorly on you, some kind of a user unfriendly software, for example. If it's very difficult for someone to even navigate your website or your hiring process, if there's no checklist or it's not clearly laid out for what they need to do in order to get ready to come on the first day, all these kinds of things, it's totally unnecessary. And so instead, when we continuously put our best foot forward, then if someone doesn't make it to their first day, we can rest assured it's not because our process was no good or was unclear or reflected poorly on us. We can really feel like, well, you know what? That's on them. Whatever it was, that ball's in their court, not in ours. But whatever it is in our court, we want to do our best to take care of that. Secondly, embed behavior skills training into your onboarding and orientation processes. Now, you're probably already doing this with your meds training and in some areas. I should probably define what is behavior skills training. Behavior skills training is, actually, I'll define it this way. It's not, I told you, so therefore I've trained you. It's not, I told you and I showed you, therefore I trained you. It's more like, I told you, I showed you, you practiced, you received feedback, you practiced more and received more feedback until you displayed the skill with mastery. It's a concept that comes out of the behavior analytic research, and maybe it shows up some other places as well, but it's very big in my behaviorism background because it's been shown in research study after research study to be the most effective way to train someone in something. Now, we kind of know this. If you think about this, if your grandma had, whether she's, maybe she's already passed on, but if she had a homemade spaghetti sauce recipe, this is like the family secret recipe, it's the best spaghetti sauce that exists. If she was going to pass that on, she says, you know what? One day I'm going to be gone, and I want my grandbaby to be able to cook my spaghetti sauce and make it just perfect, just the way I did. She's not just going to tell you one time how to do it and then assume you got it. She's also probably not going to just show you one time. Like, if she wants to make sure that you actually can make that spaghetti sauce, you should try making her secret spaghetti sauce. And then she should taste it and give you feedback and say, you might not have picked out the best garlic, or it's a little bit too salty, or it's not sweet enough, or whatever the feedback would be. And then you would need to make it again, at first under her close direction, but then you'd actually have to be able to make it without her anywhere nearby. And if it tastes the same and is the same as grandma's homemade spaghetti sauce or secret sauce, and you've now replicated it, now you're proficient, you're fluent in that. In the same way, we want to make sure that our onboarding experience for new hires has this behavior skills training, where we not just talk about it and model it, although those are good to do, but where the person actually has to display the skills and receives feedback on what they've done, and they have to practice enough times until they can display the skills with fluency, that they can accurately get it. We want that sauce to taste exactly right. That also reduces a lot of frustration for new hires, and especially folks that are new to the field, where they maybe really don't know how to do certain things. But it is super empowering on the receiving end of that to actually be able to practice until I can demonstrate the skill at the level that it needs to be demonstrated. Then it's easy to just run with it and roll with it because, gosh, I can just do it now. And that really is the most effective way to train folks. Thirdly, once someone's made it to their first day and they're now getting oriented or continuing to get started with the agency, it's important to have a clear and quality-controlled pathway. In other words, supervisors, the ones that are doing the onboarding, they actually need to get trained in how to do the onboarding so that getting onboarded by supervisor A isn't an entirely different experience than getting onboarded by supervisor B. Yes, they'll have their own styles to it, but the core content, the pathway, should have some quality controls so that we know that they're actually accomplishing everything that needs to be accomplished in that. Many agencies will have this in the form of a checklist, but I guess I'm really suggesting something a step beyond just the checklist, which is that the skill of onboarding somebody, first of all, that is a skill. And secondly, it needs to be assessed, or it needs to be trained and assessed so that we know that our staff, our supervisors rather, are doing it right. Not that there's one way to do it, but there are certainly some wrong ways that it shouldn't be done. And how often have I heard stories where, they went over that checklist and they just kind of said a thing or two, checked. And then, a week later, the new staff just looks kind of like a deer in headlights. They don't really know how to do a lot of the stuff that was on the checklist because their supervisor never went over it with them or didn't do it properly. Again, they just flew through the list or whatever. So having a clear and quality-controlled pathway for new hires. And now what are we up to? Fourthly, that pathway, although it covers the same material, it should be individually paced. A new staff who's never done this line of work before should have a lot fewer responsibilities at week 2 or week 3 into their job than someone who's been doing it for 10 plus years and who displays competence. If someone has been doing this and they clearly show that they're competent, they're going to be able to move through the material much faster. And having it individually paced reduces frustrations on both sides of that. For the new hires that are having a harder time with it, or it's just completely new material, it's going to take longer than someone that really already knows it. And so however that pathway is laid out, yes, the material should cover the same material, but the pacing should be able to be customized and individualized to that specific new hire. 2 more things for you. Refrain from the temptation. I kind of said this earlier. Don't let current crises or shortages lower the quality or the length of your onboarding and orientation processes. If it does, all you're doing is you're just locking in future crises. You are pretty much guaranteeing, we're going to keep this turnover rate as high as we can. And instead, we need to stop that vicious cycle. And then the last action step or action point is this: make the process of onboarding and orientation clear with benchmarks for success. You could almost create a mini rite of passage or a celebration or some kind of reward once someone completes the process or at several key stages in the process. Of course, the more that we can build in that the rewards are not this like other thing or kind of outside of the process, but the more that they're just sort of built in there, the more effective they're going to be. And so we want folks to know where they are in that process and to feel the success that they are accomplishing something. For example, I recently had a new hire where we just sort of set it real clear as the goal. Your first week is X, Y, Z. If you can accomplish X, Y, and Z by the end of this week, you are doing fantastic. You're perfectly exactly where you should be. And because we were presenting this new hire with a lot of new information, I could see their body language relax as they realized, oh, I'm already being successful. If I just keep doing these 3 things that you showed me and told me about, then I'm doing everything you wanted me to do. Yes, exactly. That is what we want. That is what's happening. You are being successful just by following those 3 things. Of course, we're teaching you a lot more, but those are the 3 key benchmarks for your success at the end of week 1. So I highly recommend the process is not just clear on the supervisor's end, not just a checklist that both supervisor and the new hire are looking at, but that there are actual benchmarks for success along the way. And by all means, throw in just a little celebration or a little reward once somebody hits it. This is basic behaviorism, underutilized and extremely, extremely helpful in making people move along to the next step and to feel good about it. So to sum up quickly, I guess I want to ask you one more time, what kind of a dating life does your agency have with prospective candidates and with new hires? You know, are you looking to build a long-term relationship with these folks, or is this just a casual dating thing and it's more about your convenience and what you need from them and not as clear on what you're offering to them? Now, on a different note, I want to hear from you, difference maker. What does onboarding look like at your agency? And is it working? How do you know if it's working? Send me a comment, ask a question, and I might be able to even share it on a future episode. All you got to do is email me at nate@iddleader.com. That's NATE@iddleader.com. And if this episode's been helpful, would you consider possibly paying it forward? What do I mean? Well, there's 2 ways. First of all, if you know someone that would benefit from hearing this episode, then by all means, send them a link to it. Secondly, you can write a review. A way of paying it forward is that when you write a review, it makes the podcast easier to find on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are listening to this podcast. And that you're spreading the word about this podcast, which makes more people find it. And therefore, you're paying it forward, which would be awesome. Hey, until next time, here's to you, difference maker. Keep up the amazing work.